Well, welcome to another episode Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Mike.
Hello, everybody. How are you?
Rocking a fucking Motorhead shirt. God bless you, man. God bless you.
Of course. Yeah.
So
I've seen Motorhead about a dozen times in my life. I was lucky enough to see them. I kind of followed them around one summer and saw them over the years. And yeah, just an unforgettable experiences for sure.
I don't know how you're going to impress the audience more with I've seen Motorhead a couple of times, but Mike, please tell everybody a little bit about yourself, man.
Well, I'm an illustrator. I've been an illustrator since 1996 or so. I studied at Sheridan College before it was a degree program, back when it was a 3-year kind of illustration interpretive course, and trained under some great illustrators, and actually went to school with a lot of people who've become great illustrators, people who work in the comics industry now, or friends of mine that I studied with. And it was always kind of cool to, we always, you know, you always kind of feel like your class is a special class, but that felt like a special class. And to be in my mid 40s now and to see friends of mine working in the comics industry, I kind of took the slow road to get here myself, but I've had a long career as an illustrator doing different things for pretty much anywhere illustrations are needed or used. My illustrations have showed up on packaging. They've showed up on charity mailers. They've showed up on children's books, lots and lots of children's books. Yeah, I mean, I could ramble on a long time. I've been doing it a long time.
Yeah, you've been doing art longer than I've been alive. So that is that was an impact. When you said 1996, I was like, damn, I was born the next year. Holy crap.
Yeah, it's funny, you know, I have a lot of fans who are around your age, and it's funny when I start talking about when I was in high school or when I finished stuff, and they go, I wasn't even alive then. And, you know, it's kind of fun because everyone's just, I don't know, it's just cool. It's just cool to have fans of different age groups. I have a lot of old fans that come to me for like Conan work and stuff like that. And a lot of older collectors like that kind of sword and sorcery.
I keep looking at the picture on the wall of the Viking, or is that, yeah.
That's a Frank Frazetta. Frank Frazetta is kind of like the greatest icon of fantasy art. He sort of almost created the art genre, of fantasy art in that regard, that sword and sorcery, barbarian stuff. So all the Conan the Barbarian stuff and all those, the things that have come from it kind of started when people were inspired by Frazetta. I got a whole bunch of his stuff.
Damn, the world needs to go back to a point where we're having that drawn on the side of the van. I would pay you to make me naked holding a sword on the side of like my van or something. I don't care. That would be awesome.
Well, Robbie, that wouldn't be the strangest thing I've done. So
what is the strangest thing you've created?
That's hard to say, because I guess you'd have to sort of wrap around what the definition of strange is, but definitely I've drawn different things for different people, and I've done stuff on vehicles, I've done stuff on helmets, and I've designed a million tattoos. I've pretty much any place there was a need for art, my stuff has showed up there. So and people have different tastes. Trying to think of anything particularly weird without getting too gross, but
the gross the better.
Well, you know what, I occasionally get asked for fairly specialized fetish stuff that I don't mind doing if I don't have any judgment on stuff like that, unless I end up having judgment on stuff like that. And but yeah, I've satisfied some different interesting requests over the years. It's hard to get too specific. I wouldn't want anyone to hear this and feel like they were getting called out, but I've done a lot of private commissions, we'll say, and drawing someone naked with with the sword on the side of a van, that's up the mountain, but it's not the top of the mountain is strange.
If I'd ask you where your initial inspiration came from, because I always like to hear whether an artist, because you start your style off with something like taking a bit of this or a bit of that, and then you end up diving into turning it into your own thing. Your initial inspiration, where did that stem from?
You know what? It's hard to say. I know when I was very young, my earliest memories are sort of watching my mother do drawings, and I was kind of emulating her, and she would draw a lot of like I had like I remember having like Fantastic Four comics and the Hulk and Spider-Man comics, and she would very often copy from the comic, but she would draw these flawless copies of my favorite superheroes, and so I think and you know, really in those early days, like we didn't have a lot of great action figures back then when we were kids. Like it was a real drag to arrive into my mid-20s and suddenly Marvel and DC start making these actually cool DC, you know, figures. We had very, very limited selection when we were kids in the 80s. But as a very young kid, my mom used to draw these things on like the inside of cereal boxes or a piece of cardboard, and that would be like an action figure. She'd do an Iron Man, and I'd have this cutout action figure, and that was all my brain needed when I was a kid. So I'm sure that's where it began for me as an artist. And because eventually, as my family grew bigger and I had a little brother come along, my mother had to, you know, take care of him, so she didn't have time to spend with me to draw. So very often she would just set me off to draw on my own, and that's where I kind of began to develop those skills. So I mean, all through kind of, you know, elementary school and grade school, I was just kind of the art kid in the class, you know, or one of the art kids in the class. And yeah, so it just kind of, when I think for me, I wasn't an athletic kid. I didn't play in any sports, and I wasn't particularly smart at school. But art was something that I did that created a good response from people. And I think that's really, that's probably why I stuck with it, because it really just kind of, when you're young and you can recognize that you're kind of good at something without really maybe even believing it yourself, but other people are telling you you're really good at something, maybe it's worth sticking with. So I've always had great friends and great support, I think, my whole life. And that's why I've ended up kind of doing it professionally.
Well,
yeah.
did you have the natural born talent to, or did you have to train to get that good? Because I mean, your art's nothing to, you know, sneeze at. It's something where it's like, holy shit, you're gonna stop and look at that thing. I mean, you get
I
honestly, the fact that
appreciate
you're
that.
not doing tattoo work is amazing. I'm guessing you don't like putting the needle to the skin.
You know what? That's a little part of it, but for me, it's yeah, it's just not my kind of canvas. I've never tried it. It might be something that I would really enjoy. I don't know. I know that I don't particularly like needles going into my skin. I don't typically like to look when I'm taking a shot or getting blood work done. Not that I get squeamish. I just don't. It's just one of those things. And so it's not so much that I'm afraid of it. Actually, I don't like inflicting pain on anything really, unless it's asking for it, you know? So in a weird kind of way, tattoos are, I would have to experience it to really know if it was something I wanted to do. But I can say that pretty much any tattoo I've designed, I've always seen it kind of come out the other end on the flesh looking pretty good. So I've always felt, like it, you know, I sort of understood the language of tattoos, if that makes any sense, versus the language of drawing on paper. So it's a totally different thing. But yeah, so what was I going to say? I kind of went on a ramble there. You would ask me about.
Well, how about this? When, like, for instance, have you decided to reflect into any of your art into, besides doing commission work, to comics, designing your own, for instance, like being able to create your own, or you
Oh
do
yeah.
strictly like, okay, so you have.
Oh yeah, I mean, when you work in comics, most creators I know have something of their own going on as they pursue the dream of working for like the big two. I've never worked for the big two beyond licensing agreements, where I've done things like cards for sketch card sets or collectible card sets, where I've done artwork on those. I've also, for a while, I was doing stuff for Marvel in the early 2000s, but I was designing products for like billiard rooms, so like pool cues and pool table skins and ping pong table sets and stuff like that with Marvel themes. So that was a lot of fun, but you don't get any recognition as that. You're just a kind of a grunt illustrator doing that. But the dream is always to show up in the comics with your name in the work. And that's something I've been pursuing for a long time, probably my whole life, but only really actively pursuing it since about 2010, because my first 15 years or so as an illustrator, the idea of becoming a comic book artist was something that had been sort of beaten out of me during my college experience. When I went to college, comics were sort of dying. There was kind of the late 90s, and comics hadn't had this massive resurgence with the films and the Spider-Man films and the X-Men films and the Lord of the Rings and all these things that carry this wave of pop culture with it. So comics were kind of dying on their belly in about 1996, 97. So the teachers and my instructors and who were other illustrators were just being honest and saying, look, comics are kind of dead. You should work on something else. And maybe your style or your strengths aren't in comics, and maybe you should go in this direction. Because I could draw things fairly realistically if I had to. So they were telling me to go in the direction of doing like celebrity portraits and things like that for magazines. And I did a little bit of that kind of work as well. But comics was always what I wanted to do. And so I've been creating my own stuff, but the way I broke in, or the way I tried to break in, was just to go to conventions and try to meet creators and talk to them and buy their indie books, and then like come back at them the next show and say like, I loved your book, I'd love to do a pinup in your next book, and start to get published. Because once you start creating a body of published work, even if you don't get paid for it, or even if you're only paid in copies of the book or a small amount, I'm not advocating that anyone go out and work for free, but the road that I took to get into comics was to go out and actually meet the people making them and see how they lived and see how they created this whole world around them. As they pursued their dreams to work at DC or Marvel or wherever, they still have their own indie stuff. And some of these guys, their indie stuff got picked up by people like Image or Boom or whatever, and have grown and excelled from there. So it's one of those things where it's a constant climb. I'm 45. I've been busting my ass since I was a teenager to make a living in art. Because before I, became an illustrator in '96, I was drawing tattoos and working on comic books for people and doing poster art for bands like in high school. So I've always been pushing in that direction. I just don't know exactly where that direction's the final point on that map is. So yeah, for me, I've actually spent the last couple of years actually working on a book right now called Dodge, with Matt Nixon. Matt Nixon's a writer who had a book called Retconn, which I have a copy of somewhere here. Retconn is an Image story that he did in 2017. It's a fantastic story.
It's got the freaking propaganda thing I like on it.
That's Toby Cypress's work, and it's just unbelievable stuff. And Matt Nixon's a brilliant writer, and just I had been doing some work for Aftershock, and he contacted me and he liked my work and wanted me to draw this book, which is about a werebear. And you'll appreciate this if you look at
Black Sabbath. No way, it's a bear with it. That's America if I've ever seen it in my entire life.
It's a bear with a machine gun and a Black Sabbath T-shirt. I mean, when that was actually part of the pitch, basically the part of the pitch was like, okay, imagine you're going to be drawing a Jason Bourne comic book, but Jason Bourne in this instance is an American commando who's built like Hulk Hogan, but also turns into a bear, and they fight evil forces, evil supernatural forces from around the world. So I was like, yeah, I have to draw that book. It's a werebear that fights werewolves. Okay, yeah, I'll draw that book all day.
Y'all wanted G.I. Joe, I got something better for you. It's the fucking Sharknado of comic books right now.
This actually feels a lot, and that's the feel that Matt wanted in my version of the book, is, I mean, Toby Cypress does his own thing. He's just such an unbelievable illustrator. I couldn't really step into his shoes and carry on the story in a similar style. He wanted me for the style he wanted that kind of 80s Nom comic, or that like G.I. Joe comic style from the 80s. So the interiors are all, they're pretty detailed, but it's all like, kind of action sequences and, lots of, so it's basically like an ordnance team that battles supernatural forces held by enemies of America. So it's kind of like a G.I. Joe meets Hellboy kind of vibe to it, and it's been a blast to work on. And it's, it's a sequel to an Image book. And the idea is that maybe when we have the 3 issues done, Image will release it, and then we can have it actually attached to the Retconn series of Image. But it's a little bit of a process to that. So for now, we're just making the comic, and that was built out of a Kickstarter, and we had a successful Kickstarter. Our next one for issue 2 is finished, so we're hoping to have the next one this month sometime, and later this month or in October. And we're getting a great response. Everyone seems to like the book. It's been fun. I mean, it's a Black Sabbath bear with a machine gun fighting evil Russians, man. It's beautiful.
It's funny. You mentioned in the beginning about how the teachers told you to find a different avenue because nobody expected this resurgence of comics. Honestly, it's good, and it's got its thing to it where it's like, I think more time needs to be put in finding creative people like yourself, people that have amazing talent that, they don't have a pull in the industry or might not have this type of style in it too, because I've seen so many works of art, from Adam's works of art to, people he's connected me with and stuff. And I'm like, you got fucking talent. I would pay grand or way more grands upon grands upon grands. Just that I would sell my firstborn to be able to draw myself naked on the side of a band that didn't come out where the hands look like bananas. And it's like, but you said it like, not about working for free, but about the fact of you would love to just see your name in a Marvel comic book Like,
Well, and yeah, that is the dream. And I've had opportunities, man. I've had really close calls, but it's a delicate business, and sometimes, you'll be called for an opportunity, and you'll rise to the opportunity, and you'll be standing there, sword in hand, and ready at the mountaintop to face whatever is coming your way, because you've been warned something big is coming your way. And then, just as you're about to see the creature and strike that first blow, another hawk comes in, a hawk from the company, a hawk from the big two swoops in and takes that opportunity, because suddenly in that moment they became available, and their name is more reliable, and their history is stronger, and their reputation is longer. And I'm a guy who's been drawing since the mid 90s, but people have only heard about me the last few years, and that's just the reality of the road that I took. But I've had close calls with Marvel and DC, and I'm still standing at the mountaintop ready, man, whenever they call. It's just one of those things I'll never know when it's coming. So in the meantime, I got to keep on making my own stuff, and I got to keep on working on other opportunities. Like, I'm in a great situation right now because for the first time in my career, I've been working with a small publisher, a retailer, who's working and having me do covers for companies like Archie. I just recently did some Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles covers, which is just like the absolute cherry on top of my career. And I'm starting to see, I'm starting to feel now that I've been doing it and hammering long enough at the wall, that I'm starting to see some of the light come through now. People are starting to recognize what I can do. And when your name suddenly gets attached to something like Archie and something like, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Dungeons and Dragons, and these are all opportunities I've had with bigcountrycomics.com, which is basically my kind of partners who've been sponsoring me and helping and just creating these amazing opportunities. And we're making books. Now, unfortunately, we had about 15 tour dates set across Canada and the USA to sell these books at shows. But of course, COVID has changed all that. And, but we're sitting on lots of books that when we get to roll again, we'll have lots of books on the table. But yeah, it's incredible. Like it's Archie Comics, and it's all these things I loved as a kid. And it's, yeah, sorry.
I have
You're
a
raising.
question.
Yeah. I'm just rambling. I do that sometimes. You got to cut me off.
For the master, I have a giant question. Can I get a sloth in a fucking karate outfit with a cigar? I don't care what he's doing. That sounds awesome. Like, I feel like that type of creativity is what's needed. We see the same basic shit over and over again, and then I see something like you just showed me with a bear in a Black Sabbath shirt with a machine gun. I'm like, that's what we need. People are starving for this. Why isn't this a movie? And it's the concept of we're following the basic template because the template works. I'm like, change that shit up. There's a resurgence of this. People love creativity and they want to see something different.
Yeah, you're right. And you know what? That's a really good point. It's a really good one you made. Like, honestly, when everything kind of crashed with COVID, we were kind of like, well, what's going to happen when comic shops were closed and no one was printing comics and no one was distributing comics? The only people still making comics are the people who make the comics. But the actual people who sell them, distribute them, and get them to your door were no longer in business. So suddenly things went into a little bit of a panic. Things are sort of ironing out now. But for a minute there, it was like, what the hell are we going to do? Like, how do we go forward? How do we make money? What do we do? And suddenly it became like, well, we have Kickstarter. We've always had Kickstarter. Maybe it's either going to be the best time or the worst time to run a Kickstarter, but let's just run one and see what happens. Cause we got to make this comic happen. We ran the Kickstarter. We were funded in 12 hours and we just stood there going, wow. And then all of my friends started running Kickstarters and they're all getting funded in very short order, because people want that entertainment. And the thing that's beautiful about all that is all of these Kickstarters are all people who are bringing new ideas, fresh ideas, not maybe some of them are based on archetypes of Batman or Superman or whatever the case may be, but they're a fresh take. It's independent creation. You got humor books, horror books, action books, fantasy books, art books, illustrated poetry books, and it's all in the comic format and it's all coming out. It's fantastic. And people are just making stuff and giving it to the world, making it available, because I think people are starting to lose faith in those big companies. I mean, I'll be honest with you, as a lifetime comic book collector, I haven't spent $1 on a Marvel or DC comic in a long time. And it's not out of spite or meanness. It's just out of a lack of connection. I feel like a stranger in a strange land sometimes when I wander around in those places. I still pick up the odd issue if a buddy of mine drew it or a friend of mine wrote it.
Well, when you get a comic,
like
it
that.
should be like like it's a lot about what we talk about Shonen Jump or all these manga comics that kind of come out. When you grab one, it feels like the artist made it especially for you. Like, here's your copy,
Yep.
and I'm going to hand draw this guy a copy. But you get a Marvel comic, you're like, it's been printed so many times, it's lost the touch to it where you feel that sense of connection with it.
Well, for me, I've just haven't collected closely enough. I know there's probably a lot of great things happening, but I from a distance, from the sidelines, I haven't seen anything that's wanted to just make me want to jump back in again. I know that the Immortal Hulk right now is fantastic, and that's because they did something different with the Hulk. It's probably the hottest Hulk run that there's been in 25 years. And the reason why is because, Al Ewing is doing different things with the Hulk. They're making it into a pure horror book instead of making it into a superhero book, and making it into a big idea book like a Swamp Thing, Alan Moore Swamp Thing kind of book, where these kind of big ideas are now a part of this otherwise very simple, brutish character. And they're taking all the psychological damage they've built into the Hulk. All these years we've been reading the Hulk, and they've all coalesced into this new story where Hulk is just a creature of horror and myth.
It's
And
kind of like a way of teaching, like I guess a little bit of lessons in a way. I always talk about these books that I used to have in middle school that I would only read, but they were like drawn in a superhero style, but they would be about legends throughout history and religion and stuff. And I was always wondering what these books were called, and I searched it up. Graphic Universe. These people had created books, Hercules, Perseus, all the stuff that I would read and I'd be hooked to because it had that comic book styling to it. That's what's needed. Like, we need to get a sloth smoking a joint, fighting with a barbarian sword or some shit, teaching kids to not do drugs. Like, it might sound far-fetched, but I think like things, comic books like that, like stuff that would teach like the story of Dr. Jekyll and Hyde.
Mm-hmm.
Do it in a style like that, like that comic style. That's going to get people hooked, and then it's going to cause you to be more curious. You could do a whole fucking thing on QAnon right now with Trump. You could go so far into a comic book style on that.
There's actually a book that came out right now from Image. My friend Hugh Rookwood just did a cover for it. It's called Department of Truth, and it's coming out from Image, I think, next month or in 2 months. And it's James Tinian IV. He's a pretty hot writer who wrote the book, and it's all about American conspiracies and how basically the only thing, Americans kind of love more than their country is their conspiracies about their country, and it's this kind of slant on it. But the artwork looks phenomenal. And it's going to be good. But we have so much from history we can pull from. It's funny that you mentioned that, because one of the biggest chunks of my career was spent doing illustrated history books, where I would take stuff that's old and boring and stale that kids of today don't want to read about. And I would take it and convert it into a graphic novel format and try to give it some story, so that even if it was just an interpersonal story that was happening in the background of a big political story that was the story was actually about, there'd be something for a kid to connect to in the story, so they could actually learn what was happening in the background while they're. And I didn't write all these stories; these were just presented to me from Scholastic Books and Rubicon and different people that I worked for. But I did 45 or 46 graphic novels that were just educational.
At any point through all of this, have you any time in your career from you said 1996? God, it's a while, bro. It's a while.
Yeah.
Okay. I've lived 22 years on this earth, and that's a year after.
Well, you're much more mature. You seem much more mature. You seem much older than your years then.
They called me 50. But not the rapper. I do want to ask, at any point through all your career, did you ever have a moment where you wanted to give up? Like when you saw that comics were dying and they told you to find a new style art, did you ever just want to say, like, maybe I'm done with drawing, or maybe I don't want to do it? Because there's going to be someone out there that's listening to this that might be like, man, like, it's hard. I don't think I can do it anymore. And they put it down. And a lot of times you put something down, you don't ever pick it back up until years and years and years later, where it's like, shit, I should have really stuck with this.
Yeah. Well, that's a really awesome question, man. And the truth is, there's no way I could have done what I've been able to do in my career without, with the support of my partner, my wife, Erica. And the reality is, there was many, many years where she carried the weight of our expenses and worked a full-time job in design. She's an immensely talented artist herself, dancer, jewelry maker, painter, illustrator. She's just all around pro. I'm kind of a one-trick pony, old school, brush and pen man. But my wife is an unbelievably faceted artist, and she for many years worked as a graphic designer, where she basically kept food on the table and kept kept this all happening while I was just hanging and banging and trying to get my stuff out and trying to get my work out and trying to create a body of work so I could start going after publishers and start showing them that I was serious, that I wasn't just a flash in the pan, that I've been doing this a long time and I'm ready to do something new. You know, I did lots of children's books and I had a steady gig for a long time at Retconn Publishing, which is a kind of a little branch, related company to like Scholastic Books, where I, you know, the Scholastic books in school that you order. I illustrated tons of those. And these were, you know, these were like they weren't anything that I was creating that was mine. I was just kind of work for hire, fill in the boxes, drawing that kind of stuff. So I wanted to create I wanted to break in and do what I always wanted to do and chase after that. And there was lots of times, man, lots of times. I'm 45. I started when I was 35, when I lost my job at at Retconn, because they basically shut down the whole art department because of some situation at the company. They shut down the whole art department. I was the only on-staff full-time illustrator, so I lost my gig too. And I had no recourse to any kind of government assistance at the time. It was suddenly 35 and thrown on my ass, and suddenly like almost out in the streets and going, what are we going to do? And my wife was just basically holding it up like Hercules, holding it up like Atlas the whole time while I was scrambling and trying to get connections and make things happening. And it took a while, man. By about 2012, though, 2011, she and I had started doing touring and going to Comic-Cons and breaking in that way. But the reason I was able to break into Comic-Cons, and this is probably going to be good information for people listening right now, for the last 2 years, I've just been doing this full-time straight up. And I've been doing it full-time since 96, really. But for a chunk of time, from about 2010 to about 2018, I was the superintendent of the small building that I live in. It paid pitifully, but it meant that I didn't have to worry about my rent anymore for a time. And it was during those years that my wife was now able to do some of her own artwork and branch away from working full-time and doing all that kind of crazy heavyweight lifting. And I was getting more and more gigs, and we were also going into more and more shows and finding those to be quite lucrative sometimes. Not all the time. Sometimes we came home, you know, with our shirts, you know, torn off our backs, you know, and penniless. But sometimes we come back after a pretty good show and really be able to build our businesses and build forward and go that way. But dude, as far as giving up, that's a thought that crosses my mind all the time. I mean, despite all the support I've had in my life and all the great things I've been able to do, my financial picture is one that very often represents that of a student who's struggling through college on their own. I don't enjoy huge luxuries in life. I don't own anything of value. I'll probably never own a house. I'll probably, you know, I'm not trying to be doom and gloom because I'm still.
No, it's important to show this because I feel like
moving up. Like I still have a target, and I know that one day I'm going to get to a place where all of this hardship, and I hope I get there soon because I'm not getting any younger, but it's one of these things where it's been a worthy climb, and I haven't been able to do it alone. I've been doing it standing on the back of my wife, and that's 100% the truth. Well, and for the years that I was the superintendent of this building, I did miserable back-breaking work, but it covered the rent, and the whole idea of giving up crossed my mind a lot. But when you're a creator, you have to work full time at what you want to do. And sometimes it's not always there, and you have to sit and you stare at a blank page, and time gets wasted while you come up with what you're trying to come up with. But when you have a side gig, in my case, like I said, it was back-breaking, filthy garbage work here at the building as the super, cleaning up puke and scraping vomit off the sidewalk and just doing horrible tasks like that. But that is when the monster up here is sharpening its claws. And that's the monster that wants to get back to the studio and make an impact on that drawing board. So when I was out doing that filthy work, I'd be imagining what I want to be working on. I'd be imagining on the next publisher I'm going to approach or the next company I want to try to get work with. And then I'd come in and angry and pissed off and sweaty from being outside doing all that work. And I'd hit the table, and I'd have to make every second at that table count, because that might have been my whole day chopped up doing all that work. And now I've only got 3 hours to draw before I have to, you know, go to bed, you know, or whatever the case may be. So so suddenly having less time in the studio was actually, it was I thought when I took the side gig, I thought that was the end of my art career. I thought all that suffering at school, all that hard work was for nothing, because here I am at 35 and my career is over. I've lost my full-time gig. Getting a gig like that was a miracle to begin with. I'm not going to find another gig like that anywhere in Canada. I thought that was it. And so I took this superintendent job because it was essentially offered to me. And like I said, paid virtually nothing, paid only a portion of my rent, but it meant that rent was no longer a big number I had to come up with every month. And that took a lot of pressure off. And the lack of that pressure actually created more room for creativity. And so I'd come in with my one spare hour I'd have to draw, and I would murder whatever I was drawing on that table. And then I would submit it, and I started to get more work. So I thought my career was going to do this with a part-time job. And in fact, my career did this.
So kind of like pressure making a diamond. I feel like the best advice is like, people always are like, why don't you be happy? You got this, you be happy. Yeah, be happy with what you got, but do it because you love it. But
Yep.
once you start saying things like, oh, I made this, I made that. And once you start gloating like that and go into that mindset, what that gives room for is being able to slack.
Yep.
And I think doing that, like the reason why I'm like, I produce an episode every day, why I'm like this is because
That's amazing.
you got to. That's from in my mentality. It's like, why be consistent? Do something. Like my whole thing. I've went to the gym every single day for 8 years, and I have not missed one day. Christmas, all that. If I'm feeling like shit, I go. The reason why is because I never. At one point, somebody told me, if you give up on this, let me know so I can stop paying for it. I know you don't stick with a lot of things. And I said, fuck that. I'm going to make it consistent and stick with it. That's all it takes, is when you become happy, complainant in where your life is at and where what you're doing is okay, it can be better. Set up a goal post to it. I know that sounds reverse opposite of where you want to be happy in life, but I'm like, if you're okay with where it's at, it's never going to grow. If anything, it's going to start decreasing. You have to be on top of that monster.
You got to stay hungry. You got to stay hungry. You got to push for it. Especially, like, I don't go to the gym. There was a time in my life when I was at the gym every day. I was a much stronger, brawnier young man than I am now. But the dedication of doing that is so important. And it doesn't matter what it is you're focusing on, but doing it every day is key. Whether it's promoting your work, whether it's drawing every day. Sometimes I'll go 4 or 5 days now without drawing, and I'll go, what the fuck, man? What's going on? What's happening here?
It's like when Facebook and Twitter went down, everybody was just moving their hands. Like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Yeah. No, it's weird when it's not switched on. And so sometimes you have to just kind of separate. So like in my case, we took off 2 weeks ago and disappeared into the woods where my in-laws live in Quebec. And in the quiet silence of the mountainy woods, we finally were pulled away from the noise of the city and the garbage masks strewn about and the filth and the general inconsistency of people and the inconsiderate, the mean people, the shitty people that make life during a pandemic so difficult. We were away from all that. We were separate from all that. We had quiet. And then I came back to the city, and it was a tough adjustment. But creatively, I feel like I'm back on it. I feel like it was okay that I spent 8 days not drawing, not doing anything. I came back to the city, and now I'm drawing every day, and new gigs are coming in. And I've been doing a lot of charity work this week just because I got to keep drawing. So if there's no point behind the drawing, I'll make a point for it, and I'll just draw it and donate it or whatever the case is. And, in between gigs while I get warmed up and do that kind of stuff. But yeah, what I want to say is to anyone out there who's feeling any shame that they've been maybe trying a long time and working a long time towards being an illustrator or an artist or a comic book artist or whatever they want to be, don't be afraid or don't feel ashamed if you end up having to take a side gig or a part-time gig to make ends meet while you're building your dream. Dreams aren't built in overnight. Sometimes they are. Lucky people get their dreams built overnight. But if you work hard and you stay the course, I really do believe that you can get there. I'm getting there now. I'm not getting there when I wanted to get there, but I'm getting there. And you never know what's ahead of you. And so don't feel any shame and don't give up. Just don't be afraid to take a little bit a side gig or do something unexpected. Do a job you never thought you would do. But if it's a part-time gig or something that's going to allow you a little bit of freedom in the studio or whatever to make the things you want to make, but it's going to take away some of the stress of bills, don't be ashamed of that, because here's a fact. A lot of people who are working in comics today, even the famous ones, a lot of them got side gigs, man. A lot of them have a gig on the side. I know a guy who drives cab when he's not drawing comics.
I don't want the world to see this thing where it seems like it's impossible to do this. It's like we've had this bar set a long time ago where it was like you can be an astronaut, you can be a president, you can be whatever you want, you know, if you want to, you have the mentality to be whoever. And it's like now it's this mindset of like you're probably not going to get it. And it's like I don't want that to be for anybody. I don't want to spread this thing where it's like, oh well, you're trying to be a Marvel comic, that's never going to happen. That industry's way too hard to get into. It can happen, but you got to put the work in for it. And if it happens when you're young, you got it. Good job.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
But is it better to hit your goal than to never hit it at all? Like if I hit my goal when I'm 90 years old, oh God, I hope I don't live to be 90. I hope I fucking die at like 60. I'm fine with. But you make it to the goal. And it's like, did it matter what age? Because you made it your dream. People complain about, I'm not making it now because I'm not. Yeah, it'd be nice to be younger, obviously. But you fucking made it. You're making an impact.
This is it. And that's the thing. What I've learned, and I learned this, thankfully, when I decided to change direction and go towards comics. Around 2013, I think was my first year where I actually tabled as a guest, or nearly as a guest, at Fan Expo in Toronto, which is our big Comic-Con in Toronto. And I had a bunch of just my own work that I liked, of characters that I liked in my portfolio. And I always had a very tiny little dream. And in comics, because I never really thought I'd make it in the comics. I just thought this would be fun. I can sell some fan art. I can do some sketching for people and make a few bucks and hang out with comic artists and pretend to be a comic book artist, you know, because no one's going to really take me seriously. I'm too old, or I'm too old school, or I'm too whatever. And this dude comes over to my table. He had his badge turned around, so I didn't see what his name was. And he stopped at my table, and he's flipping through my work, and he stopped at my Conan work, and he was freaking out about my Conan drawings. He's like, these are good drawings of Conan. And I said, well, thanks, dude. That's really nice of you. He goes, what do you want to do, man? Your work's really good. What are you doing here? What do you want to do? I said, oh, I got a tiny little dream, man. He says, what's that? I said, I want to get a pinup in a Conan book one day. That's all I want. I just want to show up one time in a Conan book, because that's all I ever wanted to do when I was a kid. Love to show up one time in a Conan book. And he looked at me and he started to laugh. He goes, well, I think I could probably help you with that. I said, oh, yeah? Who are you? And he turned down, he flipped his badge around, and here it was the editor for Conan at Dark Horse. He goes, give me a call tomorrow. This show wraps up on Sunday. Give me a day to get home to my office, and give me a call on Monday, and we'll set you up with a pinup for Conan. And just like that, my dream, which was a little tiny dream, had been realized. And I was just getting started, brother. I was just getting started in my career. And I said, holy shit, I guess got to look up. I got to start looking up there now. I got to start thinking bigger now, because I never in my wildest dreams thought I would have the pinnacle of doing something like a Conan pinup. And here it was. I was only 3 years breaking into, like, truly seeking out and breaking into the comic industry after a long career of being an illustrator. And I had this opportunity just presented to me because I was just ready for it, and I was there. And I put the work in. I feel like I put the work in. You know what I mean?
It's like a Field of fucking Dreams story, dude.
Dude, it was. It's my favorite story. It's still my favorite story. And the thing is, that Conan job turned into another Conan job. And years later, just recently, I just did 2 Conan covers, man. I just did a cover, well, not officially Conan, but it's the Cimmerian, which is the Ablaze publishing version of Conan, because they're just publishing stories that were written in 1926 by Robert E. Howard about Conan the Barbarian. And I have one here I can show you, I think. But it was a dream come true, man. So, like, here's my yeah. I'll just show you the one because it's handy. But I just did a Conan cover, man, and the dream keeps on being realized every month, it seems. And now I have to wonder what my dreams really are. Now I have to figure out how high I want to climb.
Have you ever thought about making a label, or trying to sell your art and maybe make a network of maybe younger comic book artists, or make a team?
That seems to be the direction a lot of creators I know are going in, creating that whole brand, creating an umbrella brand that other artists can come along and play in. And I'd love to do something like that. My wife and I have actually talked a long time about creating a magazine where we have had a comic book called Widow's Wake, which we were developing, which is a Viking horror story that we were doing. We both love the Viking stuff so much, and she makes silver jewelry, and there's just a lot of kind of cool crossovers and tie-ins with the Viking stuff. And so we had a book that we were producing, and we've actually sold out of our first 2 or 3 3 sketchbook art books in support of producing the book. But just other work came and our job situation changed and I wasn't able to focus on that book. And then Dodge came along and Dodge was a real paying gig. So I had to jump in and do Dodge. So that project is still happening, but the idea would be to create like a magazine or something like that other artists could play in our world, play with our characters, do a story about this, Krieger the Mad, or do this story about this other, Ivar the Terrible, or whatever character that we've created in our books, and have other people play with them. And I think that would be something cool to do. And everything would belong to all of us, The idea would be I would love to create something with my wife or create something on my own that's just ours, something that I can build on. Like I look at guys like Mike Mignola who created Hellboy. He created it under the Dark Horse.
You're hitting close to my heart with Hellboy, man. You mentioned it earlier. I was going to mention it before, but that fucking movie, Ron Perlman, bro.
Yeah, I know, man. But the comics, dude, if you can get into the comics are so simple and clean and perfect, and they're completely Mike Mignola's, and it's his thing that he made, and no one can take that away. And look at the effect it's had across comic books. And it's like the Ninja Turtles, a completely original idea. They are the longest running, Todd McFarlane aside, the Ninja Turtles are like the greatest and longest running independent comic book. They never worked for Marvel or DC. They just made their own books, man. And then eventually their books were made by other people, and there was toys and movies and all kinds of franchises that built off of it. And that is where the power is, man. Creating something that everyone has to have. And if everyone has to have it, well, maybe their kids will want it too, so you make a kids version. Everyone wants to have it, maybe their dogs will want it too, so you make a dog version. You know what I'm saying? Like to create something that's your own and just expand and see how far you can push the direction of the different medias in which you can take it. I'm sure these guys never dreamed their stuff would become video games, but as soon as the Turtles became hot, it was only within a few years that there was a Ninja Turtles video game for Nintendo. And that was gigantic in those days, man. That was like 1988, but that was big news back then when you see an independent comic step over the heads of Marvel and DC and make a video game for Nintendo. Just bananas, unheard of.
Do you know?
And that's why that's so powerful, right?
Do you know when my dreams of making a comic book died? My dreams started when I made a little like spin-off of like what you'd call a Diary of a Wimpy Kid. It was like when I was in like elementary school, I was making a little comic, stapled it all together, spent all this time, weeks just creating different pages and everything, little small little square things. But I took so much time and putting design into it and writing a little story. And I left it on the counter for somebody to read, be like, hey, what's this? And they open it up and read it. I fucking placed it on the counter, went upstairs, came down 5 minutes later, shit was in the trash. I said, there we go. I couldn't draw hands. That's it. I can't not draw hands to save my life.
Just do hand turkeys, man. That'll get you through. And you grew up in the age of Photoshop, though. You could have drawn all kinds of hand turkeys and then shrunk them down in Photoshop and made them the right size.
I didn't get Photoshop until I was like 16, man. I was like, all right, here's where we can stop realizing that all pictures on the internet now we have to question. That completely changed everything.
Oh, big time, man. Believe me. You know what? And there's so much amazing digital art being made right now. It's actually getting difficult to see just on your phone or the screen what's been painted traditionally and what's been done digitally, because they've got these amazing drawing programs that emulate and recreate the natural effect so well that an untrained eye can't really tell them apart. And that's making everyone, all kinds of money. I'm not enough of a digital artist to really cross that line. I do finish my work digitally with color for publishers because that's the format they prefer it in. But I typically just draw everything by hand because I'm kind of old school that way. But yeah, it's just lots of practice, man. That's it. There's no magic pill. Oh, am I off again?
No, I got you.
Okay.
How much will it cost to get a commission piece or like a nice, like cool graphic universe style, like the picture you showed me on the wall in the beginning, something like that, but it's either Atlas holding up my logo or I want the sloth with the karate outfit with a cigar. I don't know what that is, but it keeps popping back in here. So I'm like, let me get that bad boy.
I think that has some legs, man. You know what? I'll give you a good price. Don't worry about it. I'll bang something out and we'll chat again. I'll work it out with you, man.
Because
no worries.
I'm telling you, teaching this type of stuff, sharing this, and like creating a platform, like you were saying, like a comic where other comics can come in and be able to design something, add their own flavor to a mix and keep this ever-growing series. I think that's important because that's something that people like wouldn't even charge. Like I know I've connected with voice actors that just want to, they just want to chat and they want to talk and they just want to get their work out there. And I'm like, hey, we're going to work on a collaboration audiobook podcast that my buddy has. And everybody just does a voice on it. Next thing you know, he creates this show where I'm a voice of a locust that's on there that's trying to kill all humans from Florida because they're all burning gators or something like that. I'm like, screw it. Like, but it's fun to hear the whole editing process and the whole collaboration of
Oh
everything.
yeah, man.
And I was trying to reach out to some podcasters, like for instance, with your art, the stuff that you can make, there are people out there that would love to talk about the comic and do like a whole like audio thing where they can see it on YouTube and a video thing. Collaboration in the age of technology, that's the best way too.
Oh yeah, and I'm a total caveman too, so like I definitely need help in those departments. I've got some friends. I've got all the gear I need for the most part. I got a pretty good camera and I got a Yeti mic, and I haven't been able to kind of master the Twitch thing yet. I've just played around. I haven't had the nerve to go live on Twitch yet because I just not technically handed enough. I want to do it with some confidence when I do it. So I mostly just do Instagram live kind of stuff where I just set my camera up and I just draw and shoot the shit like that. But I love that and I miss that. And that's so I got lots of friends who are involved in the audio visual stuff, and I definitely this is the way forward, man. I don't know when Comic-Cons are coming back, so for me, I have to start building a new road to create work, a different kind of road, and it's going to be a rough one for me because I'm old, but I'll figure it out.
Do you think that it's going to get to a point where it's all going to start coming back again? Like I know like Comic-Con and all that, and I know people talk about like what's going to happen, when's this thing going to be over with, and I'm like, I think at some point there's got to be like, you got to realize people need sports, people need Comic Cons, people need this because we need that emotional thing. We need that.
Do. Yeah, and it's either everyone starts living on their phones or their computers and consuming live content and entertainment that way, or you bring back sports, you bring back conventions. I'll be honest with you, I do hope they come back one day. I do think they will come back in some capacity one day. I unfortunately feel that this thing has changed the way people do business now to a degree, and that's on both sides of the table, because really what I do at a Comic-Con, it represents the best parts of what I do. It's part teaching, it's part salesman, it's part performer, it's part artist, it's part confidant, it's part, listener. There's a community that happens. There's the same people come to your table year after year. Friendships are built, business relationships are established. And there's a lot of hats being worn that day and those days, and it's the best version of myself. I like to be able to do it live. I never thought I could do it live. I was always a nervous kid growing up doing speeches at school and stuff like that. I hated public speaking, but now it's easy. It's the easiest thing in the world for me now. And I think Comic-Con's had a lot to do with that, because I miss that. And I do think they're going to come back. But the problem is, when I'm at a Comic-Con, despite all those other things that I do, what I'm really there to do is to draw and give people drawings, is to take their books and autograph them and hand them back, or to sell them a book and to autograph it. And I might have to take that book out of a bag and sign it and put it back in the bag. And there's a lot of handling, and that can all be done safely, but there's a lot of transference basically, and close talking and lots of close connections. So unless it was really created in a bubble or created in some kind of way that it could be done truly safely, it's hard for me to imagine how a Comic-Con event can sell enough tickets to have enough safe capacity to warrant the tremendous cost of getting celebrities. And, we artists don't get paid to go to shows. Sometimes we're given a free table, but very often we're not paid, or our expenses aren't looked after when we show up at a Comic-Con. That's all on our own dime. And so that's a big expense sometimes, but you can usually hopefully make that money back, or at least make that money back and maybe enough to pay for the next show if you're lucky. But it's a real slow building process, and that's all gone now. And I'm not sure it will come back, because I know how I feel if I have to stand in line in a cafe where I'm seeing everyone wearing a mask who's in line to buy their coffee, but everyone sitting in the cafe have their mask off because they're sitting and chatting with their friends. And I am baffled at how anyone thinks we're going to make a change doing this in restaurants and places like that. But it's no different than Comic-Cons. It's no different than that close contact kind of stuff. My wife works at a jewelry store, and she has to have close contact with people and handling jewelry. There's lots of, but it's all safe. It's all masked. It's all sanitized and gloves and everything. But it's that's fine, you know, when you have 1 or 2 or 3 customers in a store. But when you have 1 or 2 or 3,000 customers, you know, in a section of a building with 5 or 6 waiting around the other next section and 10 more on the upstairs, that's just a lot of people inside the same place. And I just don't know how the shows, I don't know how it'll be worth it for the shows. So if I have to essentially be in a bubble anyway, I might as well be at home and I can do all the same things. Someone wants me to sign a book. Well, I can sign it on camera. I can put it in the envelope for them. I can send it to them. And by the time it arrives, it'll be safely had enough quarantine time and distance for it to be handled again, hopefully. It's one of those crazy things, you know. So the hands-on show is the in-person show. I do hope they come back. I really do, because I love them. They've been a huge part of my bread and butter for the last 8 years. I mean, last weekend would have been Fan Expo, and Fan Expo is a show that my wife and I pay our bills and live off of for a few months after. We don't have that this year. So every month has been a struggle, and we're going to find out what fall is like right now without having Fan Expo to back us up. So it's going to be a challenging few months, but this is the life of freelance art. This is the life of doing it. So yeah, I hope the shows come back for that reason too. But they have to come back. If they're going to come back, they got to come back safely. They got to come back in a way that's not going to put people in harm, because otherwise people just aren't going to go. And the people that aren't going have already decided that there's no problem out there, and they're just living their life the way they normally do anyway. And you know, I can appreciate that, but we all got to get on the same page in some capacity. And until we do, I don't know how shows are going to come back. So I am hopeful though. I am hopeful.
If I had to wrap on, what comic book would you want to live in?
Oh man, that's a good question.
And I want one that you wouldn't want to live in as well, because I can tell you the one I wouldn't want to live in is Tales from the Crypt. Fuck that.
That's a really cool question, man. I've never been asked that before. A comic book I would want to live in. I guess if I could have been buddies with The Thing, if I could have been buddies with Ben Grimm growing up on Yancey Street in New York City, helping him fight the Yancey Street gang. I know I don't have any superpowers, but even if I could have just been the fat kid in the corner that was cheering Ben Grimm on, that would have been a good place to live for me. I always think, oh, it'd be so cool to live in a Conan comic book, but I'd only last about 35 seconds in that world. I'd be a cold stain on the ground very quickly with a sword through me if I lived there. But
fucking Green Lantern, bro. Green Lantern. I want the ring. I want to just build shit with my mind like Guardians of the Galaxy, where like you're gonna be seeing a lot of weird ass shit.
Yeah. Where would I not want to live? Oh man, there's some bad, creepy horror comic books that I wouldn't want to be a part of, man.
Some of that art you're talking about making in the beginning.
Oh yeah. Like, you know, I think of guys like some of the worlds that my friend Ben Templesmith has created with his book. What's that book called again now? Well, everything he draws is such terrifying realities. He did 30 Days of Night was probably his most famous. That was that movie, the vampires up in Barrow,
that's a
Alaska.
Fucking movie, bro.
Yeah. Well, he did the comic book, which is way better than the movie. But that aside, he creates these really dark places. I mean, you read the comics, you put them down and you go, oh, and you don't want to live in that comic, man. You don't want to live there.
I would hate to like have to live in a comic like Batman and have to just be stuck at the scene where your parents get shot from the theater. It's like, every day I live a nightmare.
Well, how many times has Batman had to live that? How many times do they replay that in the comics, right? So, yeah, that's funny.
Well, Mike, I appreciate you giving me some of your time today, man.
Hey, man. Yeah, my pleasure.
Please promote your page, promote where people can find you and look up some of your awesome work, man. Because, I mean, seriously, that is fucking amazing talent, and I want to be naked on the side of a van, but I'll settle.
We'll work out something for that. Well, to find me, people can find me at Uncouth Rooth. My last name is spelled Rooth, the Viking way. Uncouth Rooth. That's on Instagram and also on Twitter. I have a Facebook page, just a personal Facebook page, Mike Rooth, but you'll see me on my face there. And if you want to be my friend on Facebook, we can be friends on Facebook. I'm usually pretty open that way, and I share my stuff there. But if you want to buy my work, there's 2 places you can buy my work. One of them is at mikeruth.bigcartel.com, which is a link that's I believe it's in my link tree on Instagram. That's where you can find T-shirts that I've done. You can find art books that I've done, original art, and just all kinds of different stuff that I put up for sale sometimes. But if you want to buy my comics, where I specifically have done comic covers, you can buy all my variant covers over at bigcountrycomics.com, which is a joint Canadian and American company run by some very good friends of mine, and we produce some awesome stuff. And you can get my my Conan books there. You can get my Turtles books there, my Archie books, and they're all coming out soon, and some of them are available now. And if you're interested in Dodge, we will have a Kickstarter for Dodge later this month. But in the meantime, if you want to get a copy of issue 1 to jump on board before issue 2 comes out, you can go to Retconn.bigcartel.com, and that is Matt Nixon's shop, or you can just email matt@mattnixon.com, and he'll hook you up with one of these books. It's an awesome book. I'm very proud of it. And the first issue is just a lot of groundwork, but the second issue is just a straight up monster fight, and I think everyone's going to dig it. So I'm very excited for everyone to see number 2. But that's my plug-in right there. Uncouth Ruth on Instagram, MikeRuth.bigcartel.com, and Big Country Comics are where you can find my stuff.
Now, you might be good at drawing the art, but can you end on some words of wisdom?
Words of wisdom. If you draw right now and you're wondering what you need to do to go to the next level, the only thing to do is to keep on drawing. There is no magic pill. There is no drug to take that will take you there. If there was, I would have taken that pill. I would have done that drug. There is nothing that's going to take you to that place except the time you put into the table. Earlier in this interview, you mentioned something about natural born talent. I do believe that exists. Yeah. What did I say?
You said interview.
Conversation. Sorry, I don't want to. I don't mean to offend the host.
Dagger to my ear.
I'm sorry. In this conversation earlier, we talked about. Man, you just messed me up. We talked about natural born talent, and sometimes I think that can be a fact. I think that people who sing really well can have a natural talent. I think people who dance really well and people who play sports very, very well are just naturally gifted with athletic bodies. People who just look good, but they're having to work for it. Those kind of people. I think that there is natural talent, but when it comes to art, I'm not sure that's true. For me, I know that I got to where I am by putting the time in and practicing. I'm not sure that you can have a natural. My mom swears I have gifts handed to me from God himself. And that always makes me feel nice. But the reality is I've spent an awful lot of time drawing, Robbie. I've spent a lot of time on this table drawing for many, many years. More time drawing than probably doing anything else in my life. So that's why I am where I'm at. And I don't want to discredit that hard work by saying I have a natural talent. But if you're out there and you do have a natural talent, or you have an inclination to do artwork and you're getting a good response from the drawings, or beyond all that good response, if you're doing drawings and it makes you feel good, then keep on going after it. And if you want to do it professionally, you can. You just got to keep on working for it. That's it. There's no magic pill. Just keep drawing. That's it.
It was like an aggressive fortune cookie, but I'll take it. Thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode.